is in crisis
การแก้ไขปัญหาโควิดถือเป็นวาระแห่งชาติ
and people are looking for hope and answers. Thai PBS World is there with you with the best minds of the day. Join us on Thai PBS World tonight, every weekdays at 7 p.m. Thai PBS World, we bring Thailand to the world.
สวัสดีค่ะ Very good evening. Welcome to our 7 o'clock news, Thai PBS World tonight. I am Natha Gomonwadin.
And good evening, I'm Tep Chayong. And after weeks of speculation, Gunata, the much anticipated cabinet reshuffle is going to finally take place after Deputy Prime Minister Somkit Jatusipitak and his team of cabinet members have decided to call it quits. And of course, despite the incident in Rayong, right? We seem to continue to have more good news today as far as the COVID-19 is concerned.
Yes, we still say that it can be good news because of 51 consecutive days that Thailand don't have local infection. And today the report is 5 more new cases, but all are returnee who stay in quarantine.
The next few weeks certainly promise to be a very active time indeed for the Prime Minister as far as politics is concerned after Deputy Prime Minister Somkit Jatusipitak and his team of cabinet members decided to call it quits. And they reportedly plan to submit their resignations to Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha tomorrow. This is not officially confirmed, but it has been confirmed by multiple sources. When asked by a reporter this evening, the Prime Minister didn't appear surprised by the news, but he said he had yet to see their resignation letters. Reportedly resigning along with Somkit are Finance Minister Uttama Samanayon, Energy Minister Sontirat Sonti Jirawong, and Higher Education, Science and Innovations Minister Suvit Mesinsi, and Deputy Secretary General of the Prime Minister's Office, Gobsak Putakul. The latter 4 resigned from the Palang Pracharat Party, the core component of the coalition government last week. They have been under pressure from the new leadership of the party to make way for a cabinet reshuffle. So Kunatha, this certainly didn't come as a surprise.
Yeah.
It's something that people have been anticipating anyway.
Yes, and there is reaction from Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha today regarding this resignation. Kun Thep Chai, when asked by reporter, Kun Prayut or Prime Minister Prayut just said that, I don't know, I haven't seen. So tomorrow we will know more confirmation.
And he didn't appear surprised by the news, right?
Yes.
All right, now let's move on to the so-called Egyptian air crew incident in Rayong, right, Kunatha? And it's quite obvious that Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has been shaken by the fallout from the incident. And so much so that he admitted today that the incident made him feel like he has been hit with an airplane. And judging from his own words, he is also aware that the incident has punched a big hole in his government's claim that it has been able to put the pandemic under control. So after apologizing for the incident yesterday, the Prime Minister and Public Health Minister Anutin Chan Virakul this afternoon flew in a helicopter to the eastern province to be updated on the investigation into the incident and its impact on the local people and businesses. The quick visit was also reportedly meant to assure the public in Rayong that government authorities are doing everything they can to eliminate the fallout from the incident. An Egyptian air crew of 31 was allowed in Rayong last week, and one of them later tested positive for the coronavirus, and yet the group managed to roam around its downtown and visited 2 shopping malls. The incident caused panic in the eastern province and cast doubts on the government's policy of allowing foreign arrivals with little or no control on their movements. Prime Minister Prayut visited the hotel where the Egyptian had stayed and shopping malls they had visited. He also toured a central market, which has been impacted by the fallout from the incident. The Prime Minister admitted today that he was caught off guard by the incident. I felt like I have been hit by an airplane. He said during a brief interview with reporters in Bangkok before flying off to Rayong.
Yes, that sentence really describes his emotion over the incident. And obviously, agitated Prayut also held the media responsible for causing panic with its sensational coverage of the incident. He dismissed a suggestion that people in Rayong should be compensated for the damage caused to business in the province by what many see as the government's negligence in dealing with the Egyptian aircrew. He insisted that so far nobody has tested positive for coronavirus as a result of the incident, and he went on to blame the media for the panic that led to many people cancelling their holiday trips to Rayong, one of the country's most popular seaside tourist destinations. You better tone it down a bit. If you continue to blow things out of proportion like this, there would be more panic, he said. The Prime Minister also said that everybody should learn a lesson from what happened so that it would not be repeated. Local residents and business operators were enraged by what they see as the lack of government's attention in enforcing health safety measures, which resulted in the Egyptians breaking self-quarantine rules. The incident has had an immediate impact on tourism in Rayong, which has barely begun to recover from the effect of the pandemic. According to Anuchinda Chinsiraprapha, the honorary chairwoman of Rayong Chamber of Commerce, as many as 90% of hotel reservations have been cancelled in the aftermath of the incident. She said the gradual lockdown easing has helped tourism in Rayong recover to some degree. From zero, we were moving toward 50 to 60% of recovery. Then came the Egyptian incident, she said. Most schools in the province have suspended classes since Monday as staff at the Diwari Diva Central Hotel, where the Egyptian state have been put in a 14-day quarantine. Health authorities are also in the process of tracking all people who might have been in contact with the Egyptians for medical tests, including those who were added to shopping malls they visited. Hundreds of people in Rayong have been rushing to have COVID-19 tests following the incident, but so far, none has tested positive.
No, it's interesting to note that the Prime Minister today reacted rather in a very agitated manner, toward some question, especially one about calls by some people for the government to consider compensation for people affected by the fallout from the incident in Rayong.
Yes.
and the Prime Minister responded in a rather not his usual style that he wants to portray in the past few weeks now.
Especially his tone and his gesture was so different from yesterday when he came out to have press conference and he apologized for the mistake happened regarding the Egyptian incident.
And it's quite clear that he wants the media to be responsible for what he described as sensational coverage of the incident that has caused panic in Rayong. And he said if the media continue to report the coronavirus in this manner, then there will be more panic in the country.
So media is to blame again.
That's right. All right, while the whole country was trying to watch out for fallout from the incident in Rayong, the Prime Minister yesterday had a rare phone conversation with President Xi Jinping of China to mark the 45th anniversary of the establishment of Thai-Chinese diplomatic relations. The conversation covered a wide range of bilateral and regional cooperation, according to Thai government spokeswoman and Chinese media. During the talk, Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed deepening economic and trade cooperation with Thailand, while Prime Minister Prayut called for a return of Chinese investment to Thailand as the two countries have been able to contain the spread of the pandemic. What you're seeing on the screen right now was a grab taken from yesterday, the conversation that Kun Prayut was having with Xi Jinping on the phone. Right? This was an occasion, it was an event that was not announced in advance, so we were caught quite by surprise that this took place at all, right? And in his conversation with General Prayut, President Xi also expressed China's readiness to share its experiences in fighting COVID-19 with Thailand and enhance cooperation in research and development of drugs and vaccines as guided by the principle of a community of shared destiny.
And according to CGTN of China, in his phone call with Prayut, President Xi and the Sino-Thai relations have a deep foundation and great potential. The two countries, he said, have overcome the impact of the epidemic, continued to promote practical cooperation, and bilateral trade has also been growing. China is willing to work with Thailand to consolidate regional unity and cooperation and maintain the good momentum of regional development and prosperity, the Chinese president said. China has pledged to scale up its support of the government's Thailand 4.0 policy and the Eastern Economic Corridor EEC project. Prime Minister Prayut said Thailand wants to deepen Sino-Thai relations and cooperation, strengthen cooperation in fields of economy, trade, innovation and poverty alleviation, and promote the construction of the Belt and Road Initiative. Prayut was quoted as saying that Thailand firmly supports the One China policy. General Prayut also asked China to consider importing more farm products from Thailand, to which the Chinese president responded positively.
All right, this is very interesting on that time because the conversation by phone between the two leaders took place as Western countries are putting more pressure on China as a result of the implementation of the national security law in Hong Kong most recently, right? And the latest news is that the Trump administration has decided to end all trade preferential treatment for Hong Kong as a punishment, as a retaliation for the introduction of the national security law. And the UK, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has signed an order to end all equipment used for 5G system by Huawei in the next 7 years. So it's quite clear that the Western countries are now joining hands in putting pressure on China. And of course, it's interesting that Thailand is moving in a different direction.
Yes. And Khun Thepchai, regarding the Egyptian case of soldier incident in Thailand, we also try to contact Thai students who are in Egypt to ask them what's really going on in Egypt in terms of trying to have measures to prevent COVID-19 and to curb with COVID-19. And in light of the Egyptian soldier controversy in Rayong, the CCSA has already barred remain flight from Egypt to Thailand. That means a group of Thai students who hope to return to Thailand have to wait quite a while, probably quite a while, much longer. The decision has been a big concern for Thai students in Egypt who have registered to return home. Some Thai students in Egypt are worried that the outbreak is getting worse, although life is almost back to normal. The government has urged people to wear face masks in public places and when using public transportation. So far, the Thai embassy in Cairo has helped Thai students in Egypt, Djibouti, Sudan, and Eritrea by organizing 4 special flights from Cairo to Bangkok to help students return home. Another 3 flights are planned to repatriate the remaining students, which has already been confirmed. Those who wish to return must submit their application to the Thai embassy. After that, they will have to get tested for the virus in order to get their fit-to-fly documents. Only those who are tested negative will be allowed to fly back to their home country. But they have to confine themselves for 14 days, whereas those who have been tested positive are not be allowed to leave Egypt for 1 month. Currently, Egypt has more than 83,000 coronavirus infections with almost 4,000 deaths to date. Despite the outbreak, the curfew has already been lifted since the end of June, with many tourist destinations reopened to visitors. So that's the latest developments regarding Thai students in Egypt who are waiting to return home. And as Kun Thepchai has mentioned, the relations between US and China is very tense. And the US has a major move yesterday by President Trump when he signed an executive order to end economic preferential treatment of Hong Kong. And what's the details of this story? Right now we have Kun Nat Bunnak joining us. So what's the meaning of this executive order by President Trump?
With the new executive order, it means that Hong Kong will no longer be receiving special privileges, no special economic treatment, and no export of sensitive technologies from the US to Hong Kong. And that also means Hong Kong will now be treated the same way with mainland China. He has also signed a bill which has been approved by the Congress to penalize banks doing business with Chinese officials who are involved with implementing the new security law on Hong Kong as well. But prior to the signing of the bill and the executive order, back in late June, the U.S. has already started eliminating Hong Kong's special status by halting defense exports and restricting access to high technology products.
And of course, this obviously is a retaliation to China's introduction of the National Security Bill for Hong Kong, which the Americans see as an attempt to erode the freedom of expression and human rights on the island, right?
Yes, and that's why the protests are still going on in Hong Kong, because when people feel that their freedom is not there, they came out to protest against the new security law or even the national anthem bill as well.
So how does China respond to this order by the US?
I think it's pretty expected that China will say it is none of your business. So to put it in exact words, Hong Kong affairs are purely China's internal affairs and no foreign country has the right to interfere. And to retaliate against the US, China's foreign ministry said that they will also impose sanctions against the US individuals and entities as well.
And what will be the implication of this order, the effect on Hong Kong? What will it be?
So analysts have said that completely ending Hong Kong's preferential status will prove to be self-defeating for the United States, because based on the information from the US Census Bureau, Hong Kong was the source of the largest bilateral US goods trade surplus last year at $26.1 billion. At the same time, there are 85,000 US citizens living in Hong Kong back in 2018, and more than 1,300 American companies operate in Hong Kong. So that also includes nearly every major US financial firm is in Hong Kong. And besides this, Hong Kong is also a major destination for US with the legal and accounting services, besides all the economy and businesses and everything.
And President Trump seems issuing many orders, but he has just reversed one important order.
Yes, and that's probably good news for international students, because if international students are feeling unsure whether they have to leave the country or not, President Trump has decided to abandon the plan that would have forced out tens of thousands of foreign students in the US. So that means if President Trump did not abandon this, thousands and thousands of foreign students will have to leave the US. Similar to how we talked to Kun Warankana yesterday from VOA Thai, that if they did not renew the visa, they have to leave the country. So that also applies with international students. But luckily, President Trump has decided not to move forward with this plan. So lucky for international students in the US, they can still study in this country full of freedom.
That's good news for international students, but I'm not sure with Kun Warankana or international journalists whether they will be allowed to stay any longer.
Exactly, but that's a pretty unexpected move by President Trump here, because last week the US officials have said that international students that had moved to only online classes due to COVID-19 will have to leave the country unless they were able to transfer to another university where there is at least face-to-face classes as well. But that's pretty good news for international students. They can still study there.
Yeah. And Kun Thepchai and Kun Nat, regarding the stance of the US on security bill, national security bill in Hong Kong, we can see how media organization in Hong Kong need to have their contingency plan. And one of them, probably the first one, New York Times, decide to move some of their staff out of Hong Kong to somewhere else, especially to Seoul in South Korea.
Images show a new copy of the New York Times in Hong Kong and street scene of the South Korean capital, Seoul. The New York Times has said it was moving its digital news hub from Hong Kong to South Korea as a result of a national security law Beijing imposed on the city last month and trouble obtaining visas. It is the first major relocation by an international news organization since authoritarian China enacted its sweeping security law late last month, ramping up its control over the semi-autonomous city. In an email to staff, Times executive said the new law has created a lot of uncertainty about what the new rules will mean to our operation and our journalism. The newspaper has had a regional headquarters in Hong Kong for decades, overseeing Asia coverage and more recently helping to run the newspaper's 24-hour digital news operation alongside its two authors' hubs in London and New York. But Beijing's new security law has sent a chill through the city because it broad wording criminalizes some political speech and ramps up Communist Party control.
As of now, Bloomberg and CNN said they will stay put in Hong Kong for now. And what about development of other issues, Kun Nat?
Well, just so you know, these are the other stories we've been following today.
Thailand has reported 5 new imported cases today. All of them are now in state quarantine. The new infections returned from the US, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates. The new cases brought a total number of infections in the country to 3,232. Hotel reservations in Rayong have been cancelled up to 90%. This came after the news of an Egyptian soldier who was tested positive for COVID-19 after his stay in the province. The Commerce Chamber of Rayong revealed that local operators will be discussing on how to regain confidence from tourists. Online registration for the We Tour Together program has kicked off today, where Thai citizens can apply for discounts on air tickets, hotel accommodation, and food bills. The project is part of the government's efforts to boost domestic tourism. So far, only 200 hotels have joined this program, as most hotels remain closed due to the lack of foreign tourists, especially hotels in the southern and northern regions.
Talking about security affairs, right now we can see development going on in the region and between superpower like US and China. And to what extent Thailand should be adjusting to this atmosphere of tension between superpower, especially we see how President Xi Jinping just contacted our Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. What does this all mean? Today we have Dr. Panithan Wattanayakon, Chairman of Prime Minister Security Advisory Committee, joining us live right now. Good evening, สวัสดีค่ะอาจารย์
Welcome to our program. Kun Panithan, yesterday Prime Minister Prayut had a phone conversation with President Xi Jinping of China. Of course, officially it was to mark the 45th anniversary of Thai-Chinese diplomatic relations, right? But it happened to come hot on the heels of the decision by the Trump administration to penalize China by ending all the preferential treatment for Hong Kong in trade. Right? And of course, also follow the decision by UK Prime Minister to ban Huawei equipment from the 5G system there. So what is the significance of this conversation between the two leaders?
I think it's, of course, significant in terms of reaffirming the long-term relationship between Thailand and the People's Republic of China. But of course, diplomacy is one thing. As you know, our real relations between people to people, between the two countries, between the two kingdoms, dated back for centuries. Both respected each other in a very deep sense, a very deep way throughout the history. So I think this is just one of the small milestones in terms of formal diplomatic relations. It happens in the environment that the two superpowers are now increasing its activities towards each other's tensions in trade, in security, in South China Sea, in the region, in Indo-Pacific region, or in what we call Asia-Pacific region. So it comes not as a surprise to us that the reaffirmation of major alliances between U.S. Thailand took place. The connectivity between Thailand and China will increase, will step up. By the way, China is our number one trading partner this year, and the relationship is now much more complex than in the past.
And what do you think was the most important message that came out of the conversation for Thailand?
Well, I think the message is that we are very happy to engage, and we look forward to strengthening up our relations in different areas, in trade in particular, in cultural areas. China invested a lot in terms of building up cultural activities. Thailand is, I think, the country that China invested more in terms of putting institutions, education, money, students. So I think it reaffirms that the road ahead will be even more closer between the two countries.
And Prime Minister Prayut said we need more Chinese investment.
Yes, of course. Well, we need more Japanese investment, we need more US investment, we need more Korean investment. I think we need more investment in Europe, from Europe too. So I think this is a recovery process that Thailand is looking forward to. It's now much more complicated as we are now resuming military activities with the U.S. Military exercises should resume. We have a small contingencies exercising in Hawaii this week with the U.S. About 150, 170 soldiers will be returning to Thailand, and toward the end of the year we may resume more exercises with the U.S. On one hand, but on the other hand we are now opening up for the Chinese people to come back to Thailand, and of course the investments in the Eastern Economic Corridor, submarine projects is now moving forward, and many more technology exchanges.
But how do you think this will be seen from the Western point of view? Would it be seen as Thailand leaning more toward China, or would it be seen as part of the balancing act by Thailand between China and Western countries?
Well, it's well known for Thailand to do a balancing act in a more complicated and complex way. But of course, European nations may increasingly worry about that act. I think some may favor. Well, all will trade with China for sure. But in terms of politics, in terms of security, they may be more worried about engagement between China and different countries. It happens that Thailand engages more with the U.S. in terms of security and military. So that will be quite comfortable for Thailand to explain to these countries that we are not moving away from the U.S. engagement.
But the U.S. is moving toward the election in November. But probably the U.S. is going to step up their game in Indo-Pacific region. What's your take during this complicated juncture?
Yes, I think that reflects. I think the American voters are concerned also about the role of the Chinese in the world. I think no matter who wins the November election, I think this trend may not change in terms of American thinking about rise of China. I think you will see the current president, the new president continue trying to engage, if not contain, China in many areas. And you will see the new administration as well as the old administration trying to persuade their friends, their alliances to move away from sensitive areas that the U.S. and alliances deem important. Military technologies, for example, resources management, for example, energy area, for example. These are the areas that are sensitive to the U.S. To the U.S. public. So you will see this trend continue upward, even maybe more intense after the new administration in the U.S. Moved into office. You have a new mandate, and both parties are now running a campaign against China in many areas.
That's right.
Not all areas, but so you will see a new upward trend going against China in different ways. So it's important for ASEAN to stay together, to have our own roadmap on how to engage with China and with the U.S. The Asia, Indo-Pacific, ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook. That piece of document is very important. That's a blueprint for ASEAN countries to engage with the two countries without having these two giant, two superpower pulling small ASEAN country away, from the centrality that ASEAN is trying to nurture.
Yeah. In principle, it seems beautiful to have ASEAN as a unit. But in reality, especially with the issue of South China Sea, we can see how yesterday, when Mike Pompeo came out to blame China that they act illegally, and that involved with at least 4 countries of ASEAN who try to claim the South China Sea as well.
Yes.
So how would Thailand should remain, or what should be the take of Thailand on this case?
Well, I think Thailand may have to work harder trying to go between different countries on this issue. On one hand, the Chinese built up in this area is ongoing and will continue to grow in the future, reflecting the military economic power of China. China may move in more into these areas. But on the other hand, you will see the U.S. and alliances may raise more concern, may try to support smaller ASEAN nations which are increasingly concerned about the role of the Chinese. So Thailand is in the middle. Some countries like Malaysia may be very concerned because the claim of the Chinese is about 50 miles away from Malaysian shores, 1,000 miles away from China. So smaller countries like this may tend to be even more persuaded to go and confront China. So Thailand has to be in the middle. Vietnam did confront China already, in the past. So we are in the middle trying to make sure that peace, stability, prosperity, the 3 important areas that we signed the agreement with the U.S. will be maintained for ASEAN.
So it's quite a challenge then for ASEAN to make sure that it doesn't get divided by this increasing geopolitical rivalries between 2 superpowers, right?
Exactly, especially in the environment that both superpowers are now stepping up their temptation, their offers, their support for these different smaller countries. We are not affected, so we are not really persuaded by both agreements because we are not a stakeholder. So we are in the middle. In this sense, it should give the Thailand a very unique position to be able to be a bridge to go in between.
So can you give some concrete example as to what Thailand can do in serving as a bridge between those conflicting countries which are claimants to the islands?
You need to ask the new foreign minister as he will come to office and maybe push for this policy. But yes, this is a critical question indeed, that we need a concrete example or concrete programs to offer in the region. Prime Minister Prayut already said, can we start with, for example, environmental issues that all countries are concerned, energy issues that can be shared in certain areas. So these are the issues that Prime Minister has already in mind, already talked about it in ASEAN meetings, especially when Thailand was a chair of ASEAN last year. So these are the issues that are now standing to be pushed forward.
Since you mentioned Prime Minister Prayut, is he keen on foreign policies?
Of course, prime ministers, presidents, leaders.
Because we haven't heard him talk much about foreign policies.
Well, the Thai people should like it. That he talk more about economy. He talk more about.
But you are confident he is very interested and serious about foreign policy.
Yes, he's just on the phone with foreign leaders, including China. So that including ASEAN meetings, and he did well in many occasions. If you notice some of his suggestions about mutual trust, mutual benefit, and mutual respect are now adopted by ASEAN. No matter what you do in ASEAN, you need more trust, you need more respect, and in the end, you need more benefits coming from those relationships. So that is his leadership in ASEAN.
So that means that he would not hesitate to see Thailand play a more active role in bridging differences among the ASEAN countries over the issue of South China Sea.
Well, of course, but in a Thai way. In a Thai way, meaning that we are not going to get involved directly in a conflict, that we are not a claimant. We are not going to get involved in a conflict in the issues that we are not against or for. So I think the Thai approach will be bringing countries together to work, for example, in a Mekong sub-region, to make sure that the Japanese, the US, the Chinese are working in different projects together with the Thai, with Thailand as a bridge, creating a master plan, for example, in ACMEX, and trying to use money from these three countries to benefit Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Myanmar. And that's our goal. I think we also donated our money into the ACMEC to make sure that these 3 or 4 countries who are now moving ahead in terms of development can catch on with the rest of ASEAN.
And for the case of telecom like Huawei, which is the UK is very much under pressure until they have to announce the ban of using Huawei equipment. What if Thailand is caught in the middle between the US and China, like this case? What do you think should be the path of Thailand?
Well, this is a very difficult and challenging issue. For the time being, I think the decision has not been made clearly, like any other countries that you mentioned. But it could be done that in certain areas that are sensitive to the security and military operations can be re-examined. But it's not easy. It's not easy. You need cooperation from China. You need cooperation. You need understanding from the US. And you need to be very careful in selecting. And in the end, it's also about cost effectiveness. So these have to be worked out in the future. Surprisingly, some of the countries changed their mind in the last few months and switched side. Thailand has not done yet, but we are now evaluating that. Then the National Security Council has a special group working on this issue. So I'm very confident that they will make a right decision.
Because a few weeks ago, I'm sure you remember that a group of executives of Huawei met the Prime Minister at the Government House, right? And in the conversation with them, the Prime Minister said Thailand welcomed Huawei to help Thailand develop the 5G network. So could that be seen as a signal that Thailand is sort of more ready than many other countries in joining hands with Huawei in developing the next phase of telecommunication network?
Well,
without being worried too much about the security threat as some other Western countries.
It's a very unique and complicated situation for Thailand. On one hand, you have China as a number one trading partner. It will be very odd not to engage in certain critical areas with your number one trading partner. But then again, you also have a number one security ally, that is the U.S. And that will be very odd not to listen to them about the concerns on security. So it's a challenge for us to meet halfway to make sure that we can isolate some of the concerns and make sure that the commercial and the military applications will not be in conflicting with each other.
The challenge is how to be good friend with one and not antagonizing the other, right?
Yeah, and the challenge is, can you manage that technology?
Yeah. But on these questions, we know that Thailand has been conducting an independent foreign policy, right, based on national interest. But would there be any pressure from countries like the U.S. in the near future, for Thailand to keep a distance from China because of the increasing geopolitical rivalry between them? Do you anticipate that kind of pressure from the U.S.?
Well, I think the distance, comfortable distance has to be kept between Thailand and partners in general. And that's a classic, typical Thai diplomacy. As you notice, we've never been close or too close for comfort for anyone. So I think that's a typical position. The real challenge is how to explain that comfort zone to your different partners, or how to compensate, the concern on one to the other. I think that's a challenge. But this position is well known. This Thai position, not middle 50%. It's a very complex engagement position, trying to accommodate your friends and trying to isolate their concerns and work with their concerns successfully in the past, and we hope to do so in the future. I'm sure we have answers for the two giants, and they may not like it 100%, but in the past they accept that this is the Thai way.
Yeah.
So is it like we are walking on tightrope between two superpowers? And should we try to find other balance, like Russia or India?
Well, I prefer to think that we are walking in a rose garden, but you have to beware of the thorns. You might get hurt, but along the way you smell the flowers and you enjoy the benefits.
Okay. We were talking about the Thai balancing act between two superpowers, right? I think it has been obvious that we have been doing that, because just a week earlier you had the U.S. Chief of Staff, General James McConnell, visiting Thailand, and yesterday you had Xi Jinping speaking to our Prime Minister, right?
Yes. And this is a very classic, typical Thai diplomacy. And then you have a different engagement at the same time, or almost at the same time, to reflect our deep commitment with both countries in different ways, and in different areas. But it adds up to a very stable and balanced relation in the end.
But did they happen by design, or partly by circumstances, that the two events being so close to each other?
Well, we would like to control all events if it's possible, but in reality, that's up to the circumstances. But I think they try to control these events.
Are we in the middle of Cold War ideology right now?
Well, sort of. I think the model that the Chinese is developing is very interesting. Centralized, put the poverty at the front of the issue, stability and growth successfully. It's so amazing that they have done that in the past few decades. But then again, you have democracy, you have human rights, freedom, liberty. That's so attractive to the Thais, especially the young generation. They're very fond of that space. So you need to marry the two, which is very difficult. This is what we try to do.
Yeah. And can the same old textbook on how to behave during Cold War still be applied nowadays?
Some principles never change in international politics, but the applications change so much, and information is available, and then you have new capabilities, new technologies, and new complexities. So it's very difficult, very challenging. Especially you have trade at the center, of the argument. Someone said it's like pre-World War I or II, but I don't think so. This is so different because of globalization and technology.
During the visit here by the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, there was a piece of document that was signed with the Thai Army, right?
Yeah.
It's called something like Thai U.S. Army Strategic Vision Statement, right?
Yes.
I think my question is, I think we have dozens of agreements, treaties with the U.S., right? So why did we need another one?
Yeah.
So what is it all about, this statement of vision?
It's unique in 2 or 3 perspectives. One, it put the Indo-Pacific at the center of the document. It mentioned Indo-Pacific 3 or 4 times. And that is very important. Indo-Pacific meaning then we include India and other in a more balanced, not tipping into the east, not tipping to the west. Its center is ASEAN. So it focuses on Indo-Pacific region.
And it's something not covered by other documents that were signed earlier, right?
Except last year, the DOD and US alliances document, which signed November 17 last year. That was the beginning of this current document. So it focused on the stability, prosperity, and open communication, safe sea lanes, and all kinds of concern in this. It's very clear what the U.S. want to do with the partners. Second, it focuses on modernization, re-engagement with Thailand, interoperability, and more specifically on the special units, special weaponry that they are going to work together. And last, of course, they focus on military operation rather than war. Including COVID and others, which is new. And there will be more exchanges.
It's more at the operational level.
Yeah. This is at the services level.
So that's the landscape of security issue in Indo-Pacific era and its challenge for Thailand. Thank you very much, Dr. Pranithan, for joining us for now for Thai PBS World Tonight. And that's all from Thai PBS World Tonight. Right now, Kun Thepchayong, Dr. Pranithan and me have to say goodbye, but please stay tuned with us on Thanlok with Thai PBS World. We'll be back at 8 o'clock. Bye for now.
Thank you.
When the world is in crisis
การแก้ไขปัญหาโควิดถือเป็นวาระแห่งชาติ
and people are looking for hope and answers, Thai PBS World is there with you with the best minds of the day. Join us on Thai PBS World Tonight, every weekdays at 7 p.m. Thai PBS World, we bring Thailand to the world.